All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the deeply, deeply unsettling lore of Kane Parsons' 2026 feature film debut, Backrooms. Now, if you've been anywhere near a theater recently, or frankly just on the internet, you know this story has completely dominated the cultural conversation. But today, we're not just going to talk about the hype, right? We are going to do a deep dive into the meticulously crafted psychological plot of this movie. We're going to break down the actual narrative architecture of this terrifying dimension and explore exactly how it mirrors the broken minds of the characters trapped inside it. Okay, let's dive into this. Before we really unpack the dark story, we kind of have to look at these numbers to understand the sheer scale of what we're dealing with here. What started as a teenager's viral YouTube video, literally just a terrifying bit of internet lore, was adapted into a feature film on a highly efficient $10 million budget. And the result? No big deal. It just became A24's biggest opening ever, pulling in over $81 million domestically and $118 million worldwide. But, the real pull isn't the box office returns. It's the creeping, inescapable dread of the story that put those people in those theater seats to begin with.
Because, the premise alone is enough to hook you right from the start. What actually happens when a normal, albeit deeply flawed guy literally steps out of our reality and into a faulty copy of it? It's a concept that drags us straight into a disorienting narrative where the laws of physics, space, and even sanity, well, they just no longer apply. The whole story relies entirely on this sudden, jarring shift from the completely mundane to the monstrous, and it builds all that tension without relying on cheap jump scares, which is honestly so refreshing.
Now, what's really interesting about how the movie sets things up is the timeline. We actually open in the year 1990. We see scientists from the Async Research Institute watching recovered footage of an explorer named Naren Warren. In the footage, Naren gets separated in this massive, extra-dimensional space and is attacked by something, an unknown entity. So it establishes right out of the gate that this dimension, the Backrooms, is a known, highly dangerous anomaly to a very select few. But then, the film deliberately cuts from this terrifying 1990 foundation footage straight to the present day, 2026, and into the incredibly mundane, frankly depressing world of a guy named Clark.
The story actually spends some really vital time grounding us in Clark's tragic real-world struggles. Played brilliantly by Chiwetel Ejiofor, Clark is a failed architect running a failing furniture store. The guy is just drowning. He's struggling with alcoholism, reeling from a recent divorce, and literally sleeping in his store just to get by. His reality is incredibly heavy, but what tips him over the edge aren't his personal demons, it's his inexplicably high electrical bills and flickering lights. When his electrician finds 3 colored breaker switches installed in a bizarre angle that don't even connect to the store, well, Clark's curiosity, and let's be real, his absolute desperation, draw him down into the dark basement.
And this is where the nightmare really kicks off. Down in the basement, Clark notices this weird glowing slit in the wall. He investigates, and in this moment of sheer sensory distortion, he literally phases right through the solid wall. The contrast here is just stark. On one side, you have his normal, everyday furniture showroom. On the other side, the Backrooms. It's an environment lit by these harsh, sterile, constantly buzzing fluorescent lights. It's a space made of uncanny hallways and malformed furniture. It literally looks like someone tried to recreate a house from memory and just got all the dimensions completely wrong.
So, in his initial foray into this seemingly endless expanse of liminal spaces, Clark makes a terrifying discovery. He actually stumbles across the abandoned belongings of Naren Warren. Yeah, the Async explorer from that 1990 footage, but before he can even begin to process this, an unseen creature violently chases him back out through the portal and into his store. But here's the absolute kicker. As Clark narrowly escapes, panting and terrified, the plot reveals that an async scientist named Phil is secretly watching Clark through a hidden surveillance camera. Clark has no idea he's essentially a rat in a monitored maze. Desperate, and probably feeling like he's completely losing his mind, Clark tries to tell his therapist about the Backrooms, but he's met with total skepticism. Naturally. So, he makes a fatal error. He recruits his assistant manager, Kat, and her boyfriend, Bobby, to go back in with him to film proof. It goes terribly. First, they enter the maze. Second, while Bobby is exploring this unnaturally steep sloped corridor, he is suddenly ambushed and killed by an unseen entity, which drags all 3 of them deep into an unexplored section. And third, total separation. Clark is chased by these humanoid entities to a dead end. He hears Kat scream for him to look behind him. He sets the camera down, and then something unknown picks the camera up. The narrative makes a deliberate choice here to leave the true terror completely unseen, and it works so well.
After that, time passes. The pacing drops to this cold, chilling beat. We hear a recorded answering machine message left by Clark for his therapist, Mary Klein. His voice is totally hollow, entirely devoid of hope. He just states simply, "I will not return." Meanwhile, out in the real world, Phil, the async scientist who's been secretly monitoring the basement, is just casually watching TV with his family and recognizes Clark in a local commercial for the furniture store. The worlds are really beginning to violently collide.
So the crucial point is understanding exactly who receives that answering machine message. This brings us to Mary Klein, played by Renate Rensva. Mary isn't just some clinical observer. She is a therapist carrying her own profound, unresolved trauma. She's haunted by memories of her mentally ill mother and the really painful demolition of her childhood home. This is vital for us to understand, because Mary's own trauma actually becomes the blueprint for what happens next. Driven by a sense of duty to her missing patient, Mary goes to Clark's store. She discovers the glowing entryway, steps through to find him, and is immediately plunged into darkness.
What follows is absolute psychological madness. Mary wakes up tied to a chair, but she's not in a dungeon. She's in a twisted, malformed replica of a dining room generated by the Backrooms. Sitting across from her is Clark, but he has gone completely insane. And the setting? Horrific. He's joined by these monstrous, uncanny imitations of humans, and he proudly reveals the severed head of his employee, Kat. It's awful. In this nightmarish replica of a domestic space, a completely unhinged, frantic Clark demands that Mary continue their therapy sessions right then and there through this twisted roleplay. Mary quickly realizes she is fighting for her life, so she uses the only weapon she has: psychological warfare. She doesn't play into his delusion at all. Instead, she ruthlessly chastises Clark. She tears down his excuses for his failed architecture career and brutally forces him to confront the truth, that it was his own personal failures, not bad luck, that ruined his marriage. And while this harsh, undeniable dose of reality acts like a psychological shock to a system, it actually momentarily snaps Clark out of his madness and he frees Mary. But they are instantly interrupted by the true horror of the Backrooms.
Suddenly, a massive, deformed entity bursts into the room. It's a grotesque copy of Clark himself, wearing the costume of the furniture store's pirate Sultan mascot. The Backrooms is literally weaponizing Clark's pathetic reality against him. The real Clark, in a final moment of clarity and sacrifice, steps forward to try and calm the monstrous pirate entity so Mary can escape. And the pirate just brutally kills the real Clark, leaving Mary entirely alone in the maze.
And this brilliantly illustrates the thematic core of the story in action. Mary is on a desperate flight for survival. She flees through these surreal, looping spaces, violently spraying her ankle in the process. She is finally cornered by the pirate in a bizarre replica of the furniture store showroom. But how does she survive? Well, she accidentally triggers a gas trap and then fights off the pirate entity using a literal chunk of cement she had kept from her demolished childhood home. She uses a physical piece of her own past trauma to smash her way through the manifestation of Clark's trauma. It's an incredibly powerful, desperate, and just poetic escape.
Barely alive, Mary limps away from the showroom, and abruptly, the frantic escape just ends. She's suddenly surrounded by figures in yellow hazmat suits. It's the async scientists. They contain the pirate entity and take Mary back to their sterile, brightly lit headquarters. Now you think she's saved, right? But as the adrenaline fades, a really clinical, quiet dread sets in. Phil, the scientist who was watching Clark all along, reveals Async's true nature. They actually began as a company developing MRI machines, tools to look inside the human body. But when they discovered the Backrooms, they pivoted to researching and mapping this dimension instead. They're basically explorers of the mind's darkest manifestations.
During her debrief, Phil asks Mary what she found down there. Staring blankly, traumatized beyond belief, Mary hauntingly repeats the exact phrase Clark used before he lost his mind. She describes the Backrooms as simply a faulty copy of reality. It's such a chilling realization. The environment itself is like a broken mirror, right? Reflecting the fractured minds of whoever steps inside it, piecing together environments from their deeply buried memories and anxieties.
And that leads us to this grim, totally hopeless cliffhanger. Sitting in the sterile async interrogation room, Mary looks at Phil and asks a very simple question. Can I leave? Phil just stares at her, and he refuses to answer. The horrible realization washes over you. Async isn't going to let their prized test subject go. Mary hasn't escaped the nightmare at all. She's merely traded the supernatural prison of the Backrooms for the clinical corporate prison of Async.
But the film leaves us with one final, provocative image that will absolutely stay with you long after the credits roll. As Mary sits in Async headquarters, the narrative cuts back inside the Backrooms dimension. We see new rooms forming, but they aren't furniture stores anymore. They are rooms based on buildings from Mary's memories. And in the very last shot, sitting inside a poorly copied, uncanny replica of an interrogation room, is a monstrous, malformed version of Mary herself. It begs the terrifying question: what is the Backrooms building next from her trauma, and will it ever stop expanding? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning your reality, and I'll see you next time.